I used to have a pastor who would very often tell us a story, the importance of a campfire and how at night it's important that you keep your embers touching. When you build a campfire, and as it begins to go out, the wood turns into coal, and that coal is hot, and it really can stay warm all night long if you keep them together. If you keep all those coals, those hot coals together, they'll stay warm throughout the cold of night. But if you separate one, if you take one little piece of those coals out and separate it, isolate it by itself, it will very, very quickly get cold and go out. And of course, his point was that as a Jesus follower, you need to be in close proximity to other people who are on fire, who are passionate, who are growing. And the moment that you begin to isolate yourself and set yourself aside from the rest of the group, well, then that's when you start to get cold and go out. And in church world, boy, I see this a lot. I see this happen a lot of times, that somebody who is following Jesus will get offended or get wounded, and they pull away, they step aside, they step away from other people who are growing and passionate and on fire. And before you know it, they have lost their fire. It's gone out. They're not warm anymore. They're cold. And of course, the point for me is that as a Jesus follower, you can't do this alone. We are not called to isolate ourselves. We are not called by God to live out Christianity on our own. In fact, it's the opposite. We are desperately in need of community. Christianity is a community. If you're going to follow Jesus, one of the most important things you can do is stick close to some embers, stick close to some people who are growing, on fire, passionate about Jesus. It's how you stay on fire and passionate and growing. Now, in the New Testament, the prototype for the church, the very first church we see is in the book of Acts. And in the book of Acts, we see the church doing two very, very specific things that helps them stay on fire, that really is the model for us as modern day Jesus followers that we need to consider. They would do two things. If you look at the book of Acts chapter 4, they would meet together in the synagogues or in the temple for worship and studying the Bible. This was a huge part of their faith. They would gather together as a large group of people, and they would sing songs of worship, and somebody would teach the scriptures, and they would grow in this way. This is an important, critical element. But it wasn't the only element. And for a lot of Jesus followers today, that's the only element of faith that we have in our lives. But there was a second, very, very critical element. When the big worship service was over, they would scatter throughout their communities, and they would enjoy a meal at somebody's house. Now, they all couldn't fit in one house, so they went to several houses, and they would enjoy a fellowship meal together. It's an important part of the process of staying on fire for Jesus is a large group worship setting and a small group fellowship setting. And fellowship is more than just having a good time. Fellowship is choosing to do life together and celebrating life's big and difficult and hard moments together. And this is how the early church functioned for years. For years and years, they would function by one, gathering for big worship, and then two, gathering for small fellowship. And if you're missing one of those two elements, you're really incomplete. You're missing part of a critical step. So I would just say to you today to analyze your spiritual life. If you feel like you've gone cold, or if you're not as passionate as you used to be, maybe you're missing one of those two steps. It really does take a commitment to be involved in a community. We've said this before, probably a dozen times on these videos, that the commitments you make really do determine the destiny of your life. You can tell where your life is going just by the commitments you've got. And one of the commitments that we need to make to ourselves, to our God, and to each other is, I am committed to community, because as a Jesus follower, I know I can't do life on my own. I need the warmth and the heat and the passion of the other Jesus followers. And in order for me to stay warm, stay hot, stay growing, I need to move close. So maybe today, that's your step. Move close. Find a group. Start a group. Be a group. And grow together. Do that fellowship, that life together, because Christians don't do life alone. Bye.